Episode 24: Social Credit and Balanced Budgets. We are often told that our economies are marked by ever-increasing debt because consumers and governments tend to live beyond their means, falling into the temptation of borrowing whenever their revenues are insufficient to meet the desired level of profligate spending. But what if that isn't true? According to the social credit analysis of Major C.H. Douglas, not to be confused with Chinese social credit, constantly increasing debt is a structural requirement under the existing financial system because it is the main way of achieving an equilibrium between the flow of consumer incomes and the flow of consumer prices. If governments, consumers, and indeed private businesses refuse to incur additional debt, the flow of consumer incomes would be insufficient to meet the flow of remunerative prices attached to production. Some businesses would be forced to close, others would lay off workers, and the economy as a whole would risk collapse. What this means is that universally balanced budgets, far from being the sine qua non of fiscal prudence and sound finance, are actually a practical impossibility under the existing system. Austerity policies which, for example, aim to curb the expansion of government indebtedness, while they may appeal to puritanical or even to merely commonsensical notions of restraint, just don't work unless the slack can be picked up by some other economic sector, and those non-governmental budgets can be unbalanced even further. In the aggregate, balanced budgets are not a choice unless collective economic suicide be considered a choice. You see, under the current financial system, the economy operates in a permanent state of disequilibrium. Prices generated in production necessarily exceed incomes distributed, and the only way to adequately compensate for this underlying gap or imbalance is by forever increasing the flow of debt money and thereby augmenting the total societal debt burden. But we need not live under a debt money system. That money must be issued as a debt or as a debt equivalent is a human convention and can be changed. There is an alternative. Some portion of the money supply, the right proportion, could and should be created and issued as debt-free credit. It was C.H. Douglas who proposed that the more money that the economy needs in the form of consumer purchasing power in order to balance the price system should be injected periodically as a debt-free input. Instead of governments, consumers and businesses spending more than they receive as a means of bridging the gap and borrowing the difference from the banking system, thus unbalancing their budgets, the increase in the volume of consumer buying power that the economy requires for equilibrium could be created by a national credit authority and issued to or on behalf of consumers as a kind of gift. Direct payments could be made in the form of a national dividend and would be distributed independently of employment status. Indirect payments could be issued in the form of a compensated price discount at the retail counter. The benefits of such an adjustment to our financial infrastructure are countless. Business and government could, apart from any expansion genuinely required by independent consumer demand, finally run balanced budgets, and consumers, considered as an aggregate, would never be put into the position of having to spend more money than they had received as incomes. But perhaps the most salient improvement, at least from the original standpoint of this episode, is that it would finally become financially impossible to live beyond our means. As a matter of strict fact, it has always been physically impossible to live beyond our means. You cannot borrow corn from next year's crop, or borrow a car from next year's production run. If the financial system accurately reflected reality, living beyond your means would become financially impossible also. In a social credit system, universally balanced budgets would, for all intents and purposes, tend to be the norm. Not because the various economic sectors would suddenly become virtuous, but because it would become impossible for the economy as a whole to spend more money than it earns. This animated series was sponsored by the Clifford Hugh Douglas Institute for the Study and Promotion of Social Credit. For more information on Douglas Social Credit, please visit socred.org or socialcredit.com.au. Be sure to like this video and please subscribe to our channel.